At my son's funeral, my daughter told the guests, "He's just here out of pity." The next morning, I opened the paper. My name wasn't even in my own son's obituary. I stayed silent, but inside, I was shattered. She thought she could erase me from Daniel's memory, but she never expected my grandchildren to stand up in court and speak the truth. Follow my story until the end, and tell me which city you're watching from. The morning of Daniel's funeral. I moved slowly, one hand gripping my cane, the other tightening the black coat around my shoulders. The church bells of St. Mark's tolled across Asheville, their hollow echoes reminding me how final this day truly was. My only son was gone. Inside, the air carried that faint scent of polished wood and lilies, heavy with solemnity. I paused at the entrance, watching people murmur and shuffle into their pews, family friends, old neighbors, even distant relatives, all present. My heart swelled with grief, but also with something else, a determination to stand tall, even if my body no longer let me. For decades I'd worked, saved, and bent my back for my children. My wife had passed years before, and Daniel was my anchor. Now he was gone, and all I had left was the coldness of my daughter, Lucy. I made my way down the aisle. My steps echoed against the stone floor, and whispers followed. The front row had always been meant for immediate family, the father, the mother, the closest ones to the deceased. But when I reached it, I stopped short. Lucy and her children sat there. My seat, marked with my name, was taken. She looked up at me, her lips curling into a tight, almost mocking smile. "There's no space, Dad," she said in a voice low enough for those nearby to hear, but sharp enough to cut. "You can sit further back." The guests nearby turned away, pretending not to notice. My chest tightened, but I didn't argue. At 75, I had learned the power of silence. Slowly, I turned and lowered myself onto a side pew. My cane tapped against the wooden bench as if to remind me of the humiliation. I tried to fix my eyes on the altar, on the coffin that held my boy, but I felt every glance, every whisper, the father of the deceased, pushed aside like an unwelcome guest at his own son's farewell. When the lights dimmed and the projector screen flickered to life, the photo tribute began. Daniel as a boy, fishing with friends, Daniel graduating, throwing his cap into the air, Daniel smiling at his wedding. My throat swelled with pride and grief at once, until I noticed something. In photo after photo, I was missing. I remembered those moments vividly. I had been there by the lake, standing right behind him at graduation, sitting at the head table during his wedding. But in this version of history, I had been cropped out, erased. The guests murmured, some glancing at me in confusion. My hands clenched the cane until my knuckles turned white. Across the aisle, I caught Lucy's faint smile. She wasn't grieving, she was curating a story, one where I no longer existed. My jaw tightened. Inside, anger and sorrow churned like a storm, but I said nothing. Instead, I studied her face, the way she tilted her chin slightly, proud of her control. As the last slide faded into black, I stared at Daniel's coffin. The silence of the church pressed against me. Memories of raising him, late nights at work, saving for his college, fixing his first car, flashed through my mind. All those sacrifices, erased in minutes by my own daughter. Guests rose for hymns. I remained seated, gripping my cane, my heart burning but my face still. The organ's heavy notes echoed like footsteps of judgment. Then, as the service neared its end, I heard her voice. Lucy leaned toward a family friend in the front row, whispering, but just loud enough for me to catch, "He's just here out of pity. Dad has no place in this anymore." The words struck me harder than the church bell's toll. I sat motionless, but inside I was unraveling. My eyes locked on Daniel's coffin, my hand slipping into my pocket to touch the small photograph I had carried for years. Me and Daniel fishing, smiling, alive. She hadn't cropped that one out. Not yet. I thought losing my son was my greatest sorrow. But that day, in the silence of St. Mark's Church, I realized my daughter was preparing a betrayal far deeper than death itself. The next morning, I opened the newspaper to Daniel's obituary, and my name was nowhere to be found. The morning after Daniel's funeral, I woke up before the sun rose over Asheville. My body ached with the heaviness of grief, and my mind still replayed yesterday's humiliation like a cruel reel that wouldn't stop turning. I shuffled into the kitchen, cane tapping against the tile floor, and brewed myself a cup of coffee. The bitter scent filled the quiet air, but even that small comfort couldn't warm the cold knot in my chest. The house felt emptier than ever. My wife had been gone for years, and now my son was gone too. All that remained was silence, and the sharp memory of my daughter's smirk as she told me there was no room for me at the funeral's front row. I unfolded the Asheville Times that had been left on my porch. Maybe reading Daniel's obituary would bring some peace, a reminder of his life well lived. But as my eyes scanned the black and white text, something inside me froze. Survived by his loving sister Lucy, her children, and cousins. That was it. No mention of me. Not a single word. It was as though I had died years ago, erased from my own son's story. My name, the name of the man who had raised Daniel, taught him to ride his bike, stayed up through his college nights worrying over him, wasn't even there. The newspaper trembled in my hands. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake, some oversight from the editor. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. This was no mistake. This was Lucy's doing. She wanted me gone, not just from the front row, not just from the photographs, but from the record itself. Anger surged through me, hot and humiliating. To the world, Daniel had no father. My legacy, my blood, cut away as neatly as cropped photos. I folded the paper slowly, pressing it flat against the table. Silence. I reminded myself. Silence has always been my armor. I couldn't let her see me crumble. Still, I needed to breathe. I needed to get out of that house before the walls closed in. I grabbed my coat and walked down to the corner diner where I'd eaten breakfast every Sunday for years. Inside, the smell of bacon and biscuits filled the air, a reminder of normalcy. A couple of townsfolk nodded at me politely, and one leaned in with a frown. "We were surprised to see you yesterday," he said softly. "Didn't know Daniel's father had already passed." I froze. The words landed like stones. They truly believed I was dead, because of that obituary. I forced a weak smile, said nothing, and shuffled to my booth. Correcting them would only make things worse. As I sipped my coffee, the bell above the diner door jingled. My stomach sank as Lucy walked in, surrounded by colleagues. Her laugh was loud, rehearsed, the kind meant to be overheard. She glanced at me sitting alone in my booth, her eyes flickering with satisfaction. "Don't mind him," she told her group. "He just tags along these days." The laughter that followed was sharper than any knife. Strangers, people who didn't even know our family, laughed at the idea of me, dismissed as a burden, an afterthought. I tightened my grip around the coffee cup, knuckles white. My throat burned, but I didn't respond. What good would it do to rise now? No. Silence was stronger. Silence let me see her plan clearly. She wasn't just humiliating me. She was building a world where I no longer existed, where Daniel's memory belonged only to her, and the fortune he left behind would be hers to control without question. I finished my breakfast in silence, every chew deliberate, every sip steady. When I laid my money on the counter, an older man sitting nearby leaned over and whispered in my ear, "If I were you, I'd watch your daughter closely. Folks are talking." I turned to meet his gaze, but he only gave me a grave nod before returning to his meal. As I stepped outside, the morning sun was bright but cold, casting long shadows across the street. My cane struck the sidewalk in measured beats as I walked, each tap echoing like a warning. They had cut me from Daniel's memory in print, but I knew this was only the beginning. The next move would strike even deeper, and I had to be ready. I drove slower than usual that evening, the road blurring through the windshield. Daniel's absence hung in the passenger seat beside me, silent and heavy. In my lap rested a worn leather-bound photo album I had put together, pictures of fishing trips, baseball games, birthdays where the kids laughed so hard cake ended up on their noses. Michael and Abigail needed those memories now more than ever. Daniel once looked me in the eye and said, "Promise me you'll always be there for them, Dad." That promise carried me to Lucy's house in the suburbs of Asheville. The porch light was already on when I arrived. I walked slowly up the steps, leaning on my cane, rehearsing in my mind what I'd say. I knocked gently. Through the curtain, I saw Abigail's small face peek out. Her smile flickered like a candle in the dark, innocent, hopeful. But then Lucy appeared. She pulled the curtain aside sharply, and in seconds the smile vanished, replaced by her mother's cold shadow. The door opened just wide enough for her body to block it, arms crossed, jaw tight. She spoke before I could. "You don't need to come by unannounced, Dad." I steadied my breath. "They just lost their father. Let me comfort them." Her eyes narrowed. "They'll be fine. You've done enough." The words cut deeper than any knife. She wasn't just shutting the door. She was shutting me out of Daniel's children's lives. I stood there, humiliated, feeling the chill of my daughter's rejection sink into my bones. Then, from behind her, I heard it. Grandpa Michael, 12 years old, burst through the gap and ran straight into my arms. I dropped to one knee despite the ache in my joints, wrapping him tight. For that moment, everything else faded. His small frame clung to me as if I were the last solid thing left in his world. "I miss Dad," he whispered. "I know, son," I said softly, sliding the photo album into his hands. "These are for you and Abigail. Memories. Don't let anyone take them away." But the moment was ripped apart as Lucy grabbed Michael by the shoulders, yanking him back. "Go inside, now." Her voice was sharp, filled with venom meant more for me than him. "Mom!" Michael tried to protest, clutching the album, but she shoved him inside. The door slammed like a verdict. Through the blinds, I caught a glimpse of Abigail's tear-streaked face at the window. She pressed her little palm against the glass, then pulled the shade down slowly, as if obeying orders that broke her heart. I stood frozen on the porch, gripping my cane until my knuckles turned white. Silence was my armor. If I spoke, if I fought, Lucy would use it against me, twist it until even the children saw me as an intruder. So I swallowed the fire burning inside and turned away. The night air was cool, but my chest burned with the weight of being severed from the only family I had left. My footsteps echoed on the pavement as I walked back to the car, each tap of the cane a reminder of my helplessness. "Virgil." The voice came from across the street. Eleanor, Daniel's cousin, waved me over. She glanced nervously at Lucy's house, then leaned in close. "You should know. Lucy's making moves with the estate papers." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. So it wasn't enough to erase me from the funeral, from the obituary, from the children. She was reaching further, into the legacy Daniel left behind. I stood there, cane planted firm, watching the darkened window where my grandchildren once smiled. Losing Daniel was grief enough, but being torn from Michael and Abigail felt like a second death, and now whispers told me Lucy's betrayal was only beginning. I pushed open the heavy oak door of Samuel Rourke's office the following afternoon, the smell of old paper and polished wood greeting me. My cane tapped against the tiled floor as I made my way inside. Samuel stood as soon as he saw me, his dark suit a little too formal for a small-town lawyer, but his eyes warm with respect. "Virgil," he said softly, extending his hand. "I'm sorry for your loss. Daniel was a good man." I nodded, swallowing the ache in my throat. He was all I had left. Samuel motioned me to sit, lowering his voice. "There are things you need to know, things Lucy has already set in motion." A chill crawled up my spine. He slid a folder across the desk, his fingers lingering as though reluctant to let it go. "She came by just yesterday, bold as brass." I opened the folder, but my eyes didn't move past the first line before Samuel spoke again, almost hesitating. "She laughed while signing, said—" He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Go on," I pressed, tightening my grip on my cane. "She said, Dad won't understand a single page of this paperwork. He's just an old man." Then she chuckled. Her laughter echoed in my mind, a twin to the smirk she wore at Daniel's funeral, the kind of laugh that wasn't amusement, but dismissal. I felt the burn rise in my chest, but I kept my lips sealed. Silence was my armor. If Lucy thought me weak because I didn't lash out, she'd never understand that silence also sharpens memory. Samuel cleared his throat and slid another document across the desk. This is worse. My eyes moved down the page, and I froze. The words blurred together until they locked onto one phrase: exclusive residence rights. I blinked. That's my house. He nodded grimly. She filed for immediate property security changes. By law, it shifts control. Virgil, the locks have already been changed. The room seemed to shrink around me. I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing the familiar shape of my old brass house key. My refuge, my last space of dignity, suddenly taken, as if to confirm the sting. Samuel's assistant knocked gently and stepped in with a note. "Sir," he said to me, "a messenger stopped by earlier. He asked me to tell you, your keys won't work anymore." The cane trembled in my hand, not from age, but from betrayal. Samuel leaned forward. "I know it's hard to hear, but you must stay calm. Don't confront her directly, not yet." My jaw tightened. "She's taken everything, my son, my seat, my name in print, now my home." "And you want me calm?" "I want you strategic," he replied firmly. "There may be counter-documents hidden in the estate file. If we can find them, we can undo her grip. But if you push too soon, she'll bury everything." I sank back into the chair, letting his words settle. He wasn't wrong. Rage would make me reckless, and Lucy counted on it. My silence unnerved her more than any shout could. When I finally stood to leave, my legs ached, but my resolve had stiffened. Samuel walked me to the door. "Stay watchful, Virgil," he said quietly. "Every move she makes is calculated." I stepped into the hallway and nearly collided with Lucy. She stood there in a tailored coat, perfume sharp, smile sharper. "Dad," she said sweetly, though her eyes glittered with malice. She leaned close enough that only I could hear. "Better get used to being on the outside." Her smirk widened before she swept past me into Samuel's office, as though the building were hers. I didn't answer. My silence was heavier than words, carrying all the weight of a storm not yet unleashed. I had pressed my best jacket the evening of the dinner. It wasn't much. Navy blue. The same one I'd worn to Daniel's graduation decades earlier. But I wanted to look presentable. The invitation had said it was a family dinner in memory of Daniel. And I let myself believe, foolishly, that perhaps this was a step toward healing. Maybe Lucy had arranged this as a way for us to grieve together, even if she'd pushed me aside at the funeral. At 75, hope still lingered in my chest, fragile as it was. The country club was lit warm and golden when I arrived, polished wood floors shining under the chandeliers. A staff member guided me in with a practiced smile. I leaned on my cane and followed slowly, searching for familiar faces. Laughter drifted from the main hall. I thought of Michael and Abigail, and how their eyes had followed me at the funeral, small anchors of love in a storm of betrayal. When we reached the dining room, the usher pointed to a small table near the far corner. I hesitated, confused. The spot was wedged directly beside the restroom entrance, so close I could smell the bleach when the door opened and shut. From there I had a perfect view of the main table, the one at the center of the room where Lucy and the other relatives were seated comfortably. Their table was draped in white linen, adorned with flowers, filled with candlelight. Mine was bare, a lonely corner with a single candle flickering weakly. I looked at the usher, but his eyes avoided mine. I lowered myself into the chair, slow and deliberate, pressing the cane against my knee. Guests passed by, some offering stiff nods, others quick glances before turning away. I caught Lucy's gaze across the hall, her lips curved into the faintest smirk, as though satisfied her plan had worked. Humiliation burned hot in my chest. I had buried my son just days ago, and now I was treated like an unwanted guest at his own memorial dinner. Still, I remained silent. My silence was the only weapon I had left. The clinking of glasses silenced the room halfway through the meal. Lucy rose from the head of the table, tall, elegant, her smile wide. She raised her wineglass high. "To Daniel," she began, her voice carrying easily across the hall. "A man who built something lasting, who leaves behind a legacy that we, those who truly mattered in his life, will carry forward." Her words cut like a blade. Not once did she say father. Not once did she nod toward me. Her eyes swept the table, then flicked deliberately to me in the corner. "We honor the builders, the ones who shaped a future," she added, and a few relatives chuckled nervously. Glasses clinked, laughter rose, and I sat still as stone. I gripped my cane tighter, knuckles white. For decades I had carried Daniel on my shoulders, taught him how to work with his hands, stayed up late helping him with studies, sacrificed comforts so he could have more. Yet in this moment, my existence was being erased with a smile and a toast, but I would not give Lucy the satisfaction of seeing me break. I lifted my fork, finished the last of my meal, and raised my glass in silence. I noticed, across the hall, Michael and Abigail watching me intently. Michael's shoulders slumped. Abigail's eyes brimmed with unshed tears. That was enough to steady me. Their glances reminded me that though Lucy could rewrite the story in front of others, truth still lingered in the hearts of children. When the dinner ended, people rose, voices buzzing, chairs scraping against the polished floor. Lucy approached me slowly, heels clicking against the wood. She leaned close, her perfume sharp, her whisper colder than the winter wind. "This is just the beginning, Dad. You'll regret showing up." I didn't reply. I met her eyes and let my silence stretch, heavy and unyielding. Her smirk faltered for the briefest moment, though she quickly recovered, straightening her shoulders. As she walked away, I noticed Samuel Rourke near the exit. The lawyer stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes sharp, watching every exchange. Our gazes met briefly, and in his quiet nod, I saw something Lucy had not noticed. Resistance forming, quiet but firm. She thought her words had ended me, but she didn't understand. My silence was not surrender, it was patience, and patience was something she could never match. The morning light in Asheville had barely broken through the blinds when Samuel's voice called me to his office. He didn't sound like the careful, measured man I had known for years. There was weight in his tone, urgency. My cane tapped against the polished wooden floor of his office as I entered, bracing myself for whatever storm Lucy had brewed this time. Samuel didn't waste a second. He slid a stack of papers across the desk. "Virgil," he said, his eyes clouded, "you need to see this." I leaned forward. The words on the top of the page blurred for a moment until my focus cleared. Transfer of ownership. The estate, my name, written in the curling strokes I had practiced since I was a boy. My signature, except it wasn't mine. I picked up the paper slowly, my fingers trembling. "This," my voice faltered. "I never signed this." "It's dated 3 weeks ago," Samuel said. "Filed electronically." She's already making moves as though this is valid. I studied every loop, every slant of the pen. It was uncanny, too uncanny. The downstroke on the K had the same flick I made when my hand was tired. The flourish at the end of Virgil, deliberate, just as I did. But I knew. I had never held that pen, never touched this document. I set the paper down carefully, as if it might catch fire. The betrayal felt heavier than the coffin I had lowered Daniel into just days before. On the drive back, I thought of Lucy as a little girl, sitting beside me while I signed the loan papers for Daniel's first workshop. She had leaned close, watching my hand, asking, "Why do you write your name like that, Dad?" At the time, I smiled, proud she took interest. Years later, I remembered her pulling out her phone while I signed checks, laughing, "For the memory box." No, not memory, preparation. The realization cut deeper than the forged paper itself. My own daughter had studied me long enough to steal even the way my hand curved a pen. I wanted to shout, to smash my fist against the steering wheel, but instead I tightened my grip on the cane across my knees. Silence was armor, Rage was fuel, not a weapon. Back in Samuel's office, he leaned forward. We can fight this. Handwriting experts, timestamps, corroborating witnesses. But Virgil, you must not confront her directly. Not yet. I nodded, though my chest burned with a heat that wanted release. She wants you rattled, Samuel continued. Don't give her that. Patience is the only ally you have right now. Patience. I'd spent a lifetime practicing that word. It had cost me friends, cost me Evelyn, cost me my peace. Now it might be the only thing that could save what Daniel had left behind. I pocketed the copies Samuel gave me and left with a weight in my chest that was heavier than any stone. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the gates of my old estate, the home Lucy now claimed as hers. The locks had been changed. Samuel was right. My keys, cold in my pocket, were nothing but relics now. But there, on the gravel path, stood Michael, my grandson. His backpack sagged on one shoulder. He looked over his shoulder toward the house, then ran to me, his voice hushed. Grandpa. I bent down, my knees aching. Cain braced in the dirt. Michael's eyes darted nervously, but he pressed on. Mom says you're not allowed here. But, he swallowed hard. I don't believe her. My throat tightened. I pulled a small envelope from my coat pocket. Photographs of Daniel holding Michael and Abigail on his shoulders at the lake. Summers ago. I pressed it into Michael's hand. Give these to your sister, I whispered. Michael hesitated, then pressed his palm against mine. A silent pact between an old man and the boy who still saw him for who he was. Before Lucy's shadow could reach us, he darted back inside. I stayed there for a long moment, Cain sinking into the dirt, until I saw the blinds draw shut. Abigail's small face disappeared behind them. That night, in the cramped silence of my apartment, I spread Samuel's documents across the table, forged signatures, stolen rights, and still, the weight of Daniel's absence pressing against me like stone. If she wants war, I muttered, staring at my name twisted into a lie. I'll fight it my way. The phone buzzed. Samuel's voice, urgent again, filled the machine. Virgil, there's more. Come tomorrow. It's about Daniel. I froze, my heart stumbling in my chest. The forged papers were one wound. But if Samuel's voice carried that kind of edge, it meant Lucy's treachery had roots even deeper. This wasn't just about the living anymore. This was about my son. Morning light filtered weakly through the blinds of Samuel Rourke's law office as I stepped inside, my cane tapping against the polished floor. The weight of the forged signature still sat heavy in my chest from yesterday. Betrayal had a way of hollowing a man, even one who had already buried his wife and his only son. Samuel's face was grave when he motioned for me to sit. He didn't waste words. Instead, he slid a sealed envelope across the desk and set a small USB drive beside it. Virgil, he said quietly, Daniel left these behind. He wanted me to give them to you only if things with Lucy ever turned against you. My hand hovered over them, trembling. Just the sight of my son's handwriting on the envelope brought a tightness in my throat I hadn't felt since we lowered his coffin into the ground. My chest burned with equal parts grief and dread. Did I even have the strength to open this? I swallowed hard and pocketed both, nodding silently. My voice was too frail for words. Back in my apartment, I locked the door and pulled the curtains shut. The silence inside was thick. I placed the envelope on the table, but my hand went instead for the USB drive. With shaking fingers, I plugged it into my old laptop. The screen flickered, and then Daniel appeared. His face was gaunt, his voice steady but tired. Dad, he said, staring into the lens as if he could see right through the years that separated us. If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it. And it means Lucy has started doing what I feared. I leaned forward, heart pounding. Daniel continued. She's ambitious. She wants control. I saw the way she looked at the estate, the company shares. Even at the house, she doesn't understand the meaning of family the way you always tried to teach me. I couldn't stop her while I was alive, but I can leave this behind. He drew in a slow breath. Dad, I don't trust her with the kids. Michael and Abigail need you. You're the only one who can keep them steady. If she ever tries to claim what isn't hers, you'll know why I left this behind. The video ended abruptly. I sat frozen, tears streaming down my face. My boy, my Daniel, had seen the storm coming long before I had. His words were both a dagger and a shield, reopening my grief yet handing me a weapon I didn't know I had. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, trying to quiet the sobs. It wasn't just loss anymore, it was duty. My son had asked me to protect what mattered most, his children, his memory, and I would. By that evening, the battle lines had already shifted. Lucy's voice reached me not directly, but through whispers and inboxes. Extended family began calling, their voices careful, condescending. Virgil, maybe it's best if you let Lucy handle things. We hear you're not in the best state to manage affairs. I knew where it came from. Lucy had sent emails. Poisoned words masquerading as concern. I was senile, confused, unfit. She was framing me as an old man clinging to relevance. Every word felt like another knife. But I stayed silent. Silence had become my armor. That night, Samuel called. She's moving quickly, Virgil, but remember, evidence is power. We have Daniel's words now. Timing will be everything. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. My mind replayed Daniel's voice. You're the only one who can keep them steady. No, I wouldn't fight her with rage. I would fight her with truth. The sun dipped low when I found myself at Daniel's grave. The grass was still fresh, the stone too clean. I rested my hand against it, the cool granite grounding me. Son, I whispered, I'll guard your wishes. She won't win. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with a sigh, expecting another relative questioning my sanity. But the message wasn't from family, it was from Eleanor, my late wife's cousin, Virgil. I know something about Lucy. We need to talk, but not here. I stood there in the fading light, cane pressed into the soil, my heart torn between hope and dread. Eleanor had always been quiet, watchful. If she had carried a secret all this time, it could either save me or destroy the last pieces of my family. I stared back at Daniel's name etched in stone and whispered, whatever comes next, I'll be ready. The diner sat on the edge of town, one of those small roadside places where the coffee is always hot and the linoleum floors are always sticky. I arrived early, cane tapping against the tile as I found a booth in the corner. The waitress poured me black coffee, and I sat staring at the door, waiting. When Eleanor finally walked in, she looked like she had aged 10 years since I last saw her. She scanned the room nervously before sliding into the booth across from me. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around the cup the waitress set down. Virgil, she whispered, barely meeting my eyes. You deserve to know the truth. I leaned in, my heart heavy. Then tell me. She took a long breath before speaking. Months ago, Lucy asked me for help. She said it was just routine paperwork. She pushed me to notarize documents, transfers, accounts, property papers. She said if I asked too many questions, I'd just complicate things. Eleanor's voice cracked. I didn't know at the time, but she was funneling assets, shifting Daniel's money into places you couldn't touch. She was cutting you out, piece by piece. My chest tightened. I thought of Daniel, the boy I raised, the man I buried, and how his memory was being carved up like cattle at auction. Eleanor lowered her head, shame in her eyes. I've carried this guilt, Virgil, she said, but I couldn't keep silent anymore. I sat in silence. Anger coursed through me. Yes, but beneath it was something sharper. Relief. At last, the shadows had form. Lucy's betrayal was no longer whispers or suspicions. It had weight, names, and documents. That afternoon, I brought Eleanor's confession to Samuel. His office smelled of paper and oak polish, his desk stacked with files that carried more truth than Lucy could ever hide. He listened carefully, nodding. I expected as much, Samuel said at last, sliding a thick envelope toward me. That's why I began collecting counterproof weeks ago. Inside was Daniel's sealed will, notarized by the state. and copies of transactions that traced Lucy's greed like a trail of ink. "This is just the beginning," Samuel continued. "But we're building the case. Timing will be everything. For now, you stay steady. Do not tip your hand." I pressed the envelope to my chest, a strange calm falling over me. For the first time, I felt I wasn't standing alone in this war. As dusk settled over Asheville, I walked the streets alone. The sidewalks glistened from a late rain, neon signs flickering in windows. My thoughts drifted to Daniel, his voice in the video, his plea that I protect his children, and I thought of Michael's quiet words at the gate. "I don't believe her, Grandpa." Those voices were my anchor. Lucy could try to erase me, but she would not erase Daniel, and she would not sever me from those children. I carried my silence like a blade, waiting for the right moment to strike. When I returned to my apartment, something white caught my eye, fluttering in the hallway draft. A paper, taped squarely to my door. I pulled it free. "Eviction pending, petition filed." For a long moment, I stood there, reading it again and again. My jaw tightened. First my son's funeral seat, then the obituary, then my home, and now, even this little apartment where I had retreated to lick my wounds. Lucy wanted me erased completely. I gripped the notice until my knuckles whitened. My cane pressed hard against the floor as I whispered to the empty hall, "So this is how far you'll go." The silence that followed wasn't defeat. It was the silence before a storm. I never thought I'd stand in a courtroom fighting against my own blood. But there I was, cane in hand, coat neatly buttoned, heart pounding with every step. The air inside the Buncombe County Courthouse was thick with whispers, the kind that rise when a scandal seeps through the walls of a small town. Lucy entered like she owned the place, her heels sharp against the tile, her lawyers circling her like a queen's guard. She shot me a smirk, the kind that dared me to collapse in front of them all. Samuel leaned close, his voice a whisper steady as stone. "Let her speak first. She'll overplay her hand." I nodded, forcing my grip to loosen around my cane. Silence was my weapon. When the judge called for her testimony, Lucy rose with a practiced grace. Her voice, sweetened like honey, carried venom underneath. "My father," she paused, as though the word itself burdened her tongue, "is no longer fit to manage anything, let alone Daniel's legacy. He squandered money recklessly. He neglected my children. He lives in the past, unable to care for the future." Gasps and murmurs floated across the benches. I could feel eyes piercing me, weighing her words. She pulled out papers, bank statements, ledgers, highlighted lines meant to look like proof. Samuel had warned me, she'll manufacture stories. And then she twisted the knife. "When Daniel was alive," she said, voice breaking in a counterfeit tremor, "he confided in me. He feared Dad's poor decisions would destroy everything he built, and now I'm left to protect what remains." The courtroom hung in silence. The judge nodded solemnly, noting each word. Inside me, rage thundered, but I stayed still. I would not give her the spectacle she wanted. Samuel rose calmly, adjusting his glasses. His tone was steady, almost bored. "Your Honor, with respect, Ms. Kincaid's testimony is not supported by truth, but by theatrics." He placed fresh documents on the table. The so-called squandered funds were withdrawals for Daniel's medical treatments. And these alleged financial blunders? He tapped the papers. Transactions made under Mrs. Kincaid's own authorization. Lucy's cheeks flushed, her eyes flicking toward her attorneys. She hadn't expected the counterpunch so soon. I remained silent, watching her unravel in small, almost invisible ways, the twitch of her jaw, the way her fingers tightened on the witness stand. Then came a sound that cracked the room open. "Your Honor, may we speak?" Michael's young voice. He stood up from the back, his little sister Abigail clutching his hand. Lucy's head whipped around, fury burning in her eyes. "No," she snapped. "Sit down." But the judge raised a hand. "They may speak." The children walked to the front, their steps small but brave. Michael stood tall as he could, his voice trembling but true. My grandpa, he's the only one who sat with us when Dad died. He prayed with us. He gave me pictures of Dad so I wouldn't forget. Abigail, tears slipping down her cheeks, added, He's kind. He's quiet. But he loves us. Don't say he doesn't. The courtroom hushed. Even the walls seemed to lean closer. Their words rang louder than Lucy's polished lies. For the first time in weeks, I felt something more than anger. I felt pride, a quiet surge of hope that anchored me to the floor. The judge cleared his throat. This matter requires further evidence. I am postponing my ruling until the next session. Lucy's face curdled into rage. She stormed past me, her perfume sharp, her whisper sharper. This isn't over. Dad. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. As she disappeared down the hall, I stood taller, Samuel's hand briefly on my shoulder. For the first time, the silence I carried felt heavier than her words. Heavier and stronger. Lucy thought she had won. But deep inside, I knew the tide had begun to shift. The courthouse in Asheville felt heavier that morning than it ever had before. I arrived early, cane steady in my hand, but my heart was pacing faster than my steps. Samuel Rourke, my lawyer and only real ally in this storm, met me at the entrance. His face carried the kind of calm only a man who knew the truth could wear. Virgil, he said, pressing my arm lightly, today changes everything. I nodded, though inside I feared that nothing could change the years of silence, betrayal, and the image of my daughter's cold eyes. Across the marble hallway, Lucy entered, flanked by her attorneys and a few relatives she had coaxed into her corner. She walked as though she already owned the place, chin high, smirk sharpened like a knife. She didn't glance at me, not fully, just a sideways smile, the kind that told me she thought I was already finished. But Daniel's voice was waiting. I could feel it. The courtroom hushed as the judge called the session to order. Samuel stood, his tone firm but respectful. Your Honor, we submit sealed evidence, a recording and accompanying letter authenticated by the late Daniel Kincaid before his passing. Lucy laughed out loud, drawing startled looks from the pews. What now? Another desperate stunt? The judge's gavel cracked once. Quiet. The lights dimmed, and for a moment the courtroom was swallowed in silence. The only sound my own heart thudding against my ribs. Then, the screen came alive. Daniel. My son appeared frail, his cheeks thinner than I remembered. But his eyes, oh, his eyes, still carried the steady fire of truth. He sat at a desk, camera steady, voice unshaken. If you're seeing this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you face to face, Daniel began. Dad, I trust you. You've always put family before yourself. And I want you to protect Michael and Abigail. And everything I built for them. My throat tightened. I could barely breathe, gripping my cane with both hands. Daniel continued, each word cutting through the lies Lucy had spread. I know Lucy. I know how she can twist things. If she ever tries to take what isn't hers, remember, this is why I left this behind. My estate, my businesses, my legacy, I entrust them to you. Dad. Gasps echoed around the room. A few of Lucy's allies shifted uncomfortably. I bowed my head, tears slipping freely down my cheeks. It was as though Daniel had reached back from beyond the grave to place his hand on my shoulder, steadying me one last time. Then came Lucy's cackle. This is pathetic. Anyone can fake a video these days. This isn't evidence, it's a trick. Her laughter rang out, shrill and forced, but it didn't last. The judge spoke evenly, but firmly. This recording was verified by digital forensic experts and remains under sealed chain of custody. It is authentic. Lucy's laughter broke into silence, her face blanched, her lips twitching as whispers spread among the crowd. For the first time since this war began, I saw something new in her eyes. Fear. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I sat still, my dignity unshaken, watching as the truth cut deeper than any of my words ever could. My son's trust had spoken for me. Then, I felt two small hands slip into mine, Michael on my right, Abigail on my left. They had moved from the benches to stand beside me, their young faces glowing with something Lucy could never fake: love. I squeezed their hands gently. My heart swelled, not just with grief, but with gratitude. Daniel's children had chosen me. They had chosen truth. The judge rapped the gavel again. This court will proceed with investigations into potential fraud and falsification of documents presented by Ms. Lucy Kincaid. Proceedings are adjourned until evidence review is complete. Lucy sat frozen, her jaw clenched, face pale as marble. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, her empire cracking right beneath her. I breathed deeply, closing my eyes for a moment. I had come into this courthouse bracing for humiliation. Instead, I walked out with Daniel's voice still ringing in my ears, steady as a bell. For the first time, I believed we might actually win. I never thought I'd live long enough to see my own daughter try to steal not only my home, not only my dignity, but my very life. Yet the envelope pressed against my apartment door that morning told me otherwise. The words blurred as I read them. Petition for guardianship of Virgil Kincaid. Lucy was claiming I was incompetent, senile, unable to manage my affairs. In her eyes, I wasn't a father anymore, wasn't even a man. I was an obstacle to be removed, an old relic whose name she wanted struck from every page of our family's story. My breath caught. This wasn't just about money now. This was about my freedom, my very right to exist as myself. I sat heavily in my chair, cane across my lap, petition notice trembling in my hands. Anger simmered low in my chest, but I did not let it spill over. I had learned, across 75 long years, that silence can be a stronger weapon than rage. She thinks I'm weak, I muttered to the empty room, but she's the one who doesn't understand. Age is not weakness, it is witness. That night, I began writing. Every meal, every step I took, every phone call with Samuel, every thought I could track. My handwriting steady, my mind sharp. If Lucy wanted to paint me as feeble, I would show the world how steady my hand remained. 2 days later, Eleanor came to see me. She looked more fragile than I remembered, her hands clasped tight around her purse. She sat across from me at the little diner where we'd met before and took a long breath. "Virgil," she whispered, leaning close. I should have spoken sooner. Lucy pressured me months ago. She asked me to notarize documents, ones I knew weren't right. She told me not to ask questions. My chest tightened, but not with surprise, with confirmation. "And you did it?" I asked softly. She lowered her head. "I was afraid. She said she'd cut me off from the family, ruin my name, but I can't let her destroy you. I'll testify. I'll tell the court what she made me do." For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift inside me. Hope. "Eleanor," I said, reaching for her trembling hand. "You've given me more than testimony. You've given me a chance to believe truth still matters." The courthouse smelled of old wood and paper when I stepped inside with Samuel at my side. Lucy was already there, her lipstick perfect, her suit sharp. She looked at me as though she were staring down a defeated man. She paraded witness after witness, family friends, distant cousins, even a neighbor, claiming I'd forgotten conversations, misplaced checks, left lights burning at night. They said I was slipping, that I was unfit. Samuel rose, his voice calm, methodical. "Mr. Kincaid, can you show us your ledger?" I produced my journal, every page dated, every entry in place. My hand had not wavered. My memory was intact. Then Eleanor walked to the stand. Her voice shook at first, but steadied as she continued. "Lucy asked me to falsify notarizations. She knew what she was doing. She lied. She laughed about it afterward." Gasps rippled through the room. Lucy's face twisted, rage spilling out as she shouted, "Liar!" I did not move. I sat silent, hands folded atop my cane. My silence was louder than her screams. The judge raised his hand for order. "The court will investigate these claims. The petition stands unresolved, but new evidence compels us to delay ruling." Lucy's face burned crimson. She stormed out of the room, heels striking the floor like hammers, and as she passed me, she hissed, "I'll make sure you die alone." I turned my head slowly, my voice steady as a winter wind. "You've already lost, Lucy. You just don't know it yet." As I walked from the courtroom, I realized something. The petition meant to strip me of my dignity had instead stripped Lucy of her mask. The world was beginning to see her for what she truly was, and Daniel's truth was yet to come. I walked into the courthouse one last time, the oak doors closing behind me with a sound that echoed like the end of a long storm. My cane tapped steady against the marble floor, but my heart was calm. For weeks I had lived under Lucy's shadow, her laughter, her lies, her attempts to strip me of my dignity. But today was different. Today, I wasn't just a grieving father. I was the keeper of Daniel's legacy, and I had the truth at my side. Lucy entered moments later, a pale shadow of the daughter who once mocked me in public. Her confidence was gone, replaced by trembling hands clutching papers she knew no longer mattered. Her entourage whispered nervously, avoiding my eyes. For the first time in this long battle, I could see fear on her face. The judge's voice carried across the courtroom with the weight of finality. He summarized the weeks of hearings, the forged documents, Eleanor's brave testimony, the video Daniel had left behind, and the relentless truth Samuel had laid before the court. Every word struck like a hammer. My daughter's schemes were no longer secrets. They were public record, burned into the history of this town. When the ruling came, it was swift. Lucy's petition was invalid. Her claims were condemned as fraud. An investigation was ordered into her manipulation and forgery. I heard the whispers ripple through the room, felt the collective exhale of people who had seen through her mask. The laughter she once used to humiliate me was gone, swallowed by silence. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I sat with my hands folded on my cane, staring straight ahead. Quiet dignity. That was my answer. And then, like a beam of light in that somber courtroom, Michael and Abigail rushed to me. They clung to me in front of everyone, their small arms fierce with love. "We believe in you, Grandpa," Michael whispered, his voice breaking. Abigail nodded, her tears wetting my coat. I closed my eyes and felt Daniel's presence in that moment. My son's voice, his trust, his final wish. I had honored them. This victory was not about the money Lucy tried to steal. It was about proving that truth, no matter how buried, cannot be erased. Lucy stormed out of the courthouse, her heels striking like the footsteps of a retreating enemy. No one followed her. Even those who once stood at her side turned their backs. Eleanor met my gaze and gave me a nod, her quiet courage having helped tip the scales. Samuel placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "It's over, Virgil." You stood taller than her lies. That evening, I returned home to the silence of my small apartment. On the table sat a framed picture of Daniel. I rested my cane against the chair and lowered myself beside it. "We did it, son," I whispered. "They couldn't erase us." The weight that had pressed on my chest for weeks finally lifted. Later, Michael and Abigail visited, their laughter filling the rooms. They set their school books on my table, as if declaring that my home was theirs too. For the first time in months, I felt alive again, not because of any court ruling, but because my family's thread had not been cut. And so, I leave you with this. My quiet testimony: family should be built on trust, not greed. Betrayal can break bones, but truth will outlast it. And silence, true silence, the kind that waits with patience, is not weakness. It is a weapon sharper than any insult, stronger than any lie. Justice didn't come to me with shouting or fists. It came with patience, truth, and the silence that finally spoke louder than her laughter. To you, who may be older, who may feel forgotten, who may fear that age has made you weak, never believe it. Dignity is not something that can be stolen by years or by selfish children. It is earned by a life lived honestly. And in the end, it is dignity, truth, and persistence that will outlast betrayal. Sometimes, the quietest voice is the one that wins in the end.